So I've learned a lot by trial and error, obviously, and I'm still learning from trial and error. But what I would say is develop a relationship with your representative, and that is very important.
There is a difference between theory and practice. Often on this podcast, we're speaking with insurance professionals who are experts in any given area with insurance, and they can give their perspective theoretically on how things ought to go. Here's how you should think about building an insurance policy for your ministry, or how you should think about this or that risk. But in practice, what's it like to be the person actually consuming that insurance product? What questions should you ask? Well, today we get the real privilege of speaking with Denise Bailey. She's the Director of Operations for the South Carolina District of the Wesleyan Church, and she has some incredible insights from that side of the table, from that side of the discussion. So I won't waste any more time on this intro. Let's get right into this great conversation with Denise Bailey. All right, as promised, it is my sincere pleasure to be joined today by Denise Bailey, the Director of Operations for the South Carolina District of the Wesleyan Church. Denise, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here, Adam.
So I know that this isn't the only hat that you wear, but with this particular hat, what is your role then within the District of the Wesleyan Church, and maybe even also for your specific local church?
Yes. So I get the privilege of being the director of operations, as you said earlier. And really, what it entails a few things, but really, we try to make sure that we resource the churches in our district. So we have about 50 churches across the South Carolina district. And that could be me coming alongside of our pastors and being a resource to them through the many different, roles that they play at their church. Or it could be simply looking through their insurance policies with them and helping them, right size something there, or maybe looking through some of the documents they have, or helping them to streamline things at their local church. So I get the privilege of doing that. And at the local church level, I get to serve as vice chair at my local church. And so get to be involved in that way as well.
So it sounds like with both of those roles and a lot of the things you do for the pastors there in South Carolina, you are aware of what the insurance purchase process is like and claims process is like. So talk to us about your involvement within that particular part, how you help pastors evaluate their insurance policy and their plan, or what it is you do to help them.
Yes. So I'll start a little bit from the local church level and then I'll go into the district level because that's really where I probably first formed a really good relationship with Lightwell and with our account rep. And we have at the local church level where I serve, we have quite a few buildings. So a pretty large campus. And so one of the things that we require is every 3 years, we need to do a really diligent look at all of our insurance policies, what the liability we carry on each of them is, what's the value of that, just a really good look. So I had been doing that for a little while already. And then a couple of years ago, when I took the role of director of operations, we also have a policy for the district itself with Lightwell. And so went through that process there and then really started teaming up with our churches across the district and said, if we can come alongside you and look through those policies with you, let's do that along with the Lightwell team. And from that, I mean, I get very detailed into it. It could be we're looking at the risk that we may have, and that could even be what programs the church, is running, and those risks can be different. It could be cyber risk. It could be, you just name it, a number of different areas. But I will tell you, I have gotten to know the ins and outs of the policies much better. But really, in the end, too, it helps us to be really good stewards to make sure that we have proper insurance coverage and that we have fully understood what the risks are so we can make those good decisions for ourselves, for our churches.
I love that. I love the way you said that. One of the things we talk about on this podcast a lot with our Lightwell representatives is the importance for churches to be working with someone who really understands the unique needs of a ministry. Now, that's one thing for a Lightwell Insurance Advisor to say that from their perspective, but as a representative of your district and of your church, what does that mean to you as the consumer of the insurance product? What does it mean to work with someone who understands the unique needs of a ministry? Is that actually important?
It's very important. So, from a high level, obviously you have the infrastructure that's in place maybe on a campus at a church. But if you get down a little bit even I would say a little more micro level. And you could look at some of the programs that churches run. You might have, it could be something as simple as we're going to have a night for the kids and we're going to rent water slides, right? Has anyone thought about, do we need a rider on the policy for that? So that's where it's been really helpful, where I can pick up the phone and call our representative. I will email them. What I like is that they have our best interests in mind. So they're not trying to sell more than what I need, but they are really trying to protect us. So when I reach out and ask them, we've got let's say a bus that we're picking up, children every Wednesday night and bringing them in. We want to make sure we have sufficient coverage on that. I know that the way they're going to look at that is through the eyes that we're looking at it. We want to be risk averse. We want to protect our people. And we want to make sure that everyone is covered in a really good way and that we do not expose our churches to undue risk from a monetary perspective as well.
Man, I love that. And really, that kind of calls back to, you used a word earlier that I absolutely love, being a good steward.
Hmm.
Because I think that oftentimes I work, I'm bivocational. I work in my church as well as working a full time job. And it can be easy to lean on the idea of spending less as like the primary filter of stewardship. But that's not what I hear you saying. So help me understand more of that expansive view that you're saying of stewardship for your district and for your church.
Yes. So spending less is not always better, just like you said. So when we're looking through it, we do want to actually know, one, if we have the proper coverage, but there's sometimes when we need to actually increase our coverage in certain areas. The other one item that's an example in the last, I would say probably year or so, there was a change in policy for natural disasters and what that looked like. So when I received the notification from Lightwell of that change, which means that's going to affect any of our churches that are using the policy, using Lightwell, and our district as well that has a policy. So I just called my representative right away, said, what does this mean? And there was a change in the co-payment as well. And so, it wasn't that it was going to be wise for us to get the lowest co-payment possible, right? So we went ahead and for some of our churches actually increased that, because if you think about it, if a church is going to budget X amount a year for repairs or maintenance or things like that, you want to make sure they've also budgeted for any of that, that co-payment, what they have to pay first to start with. So if that's 2,500 or 10,000 or 30,000, what does that look like? And that way, if a natural disaster happens, they have already understood what that risk is.
That's exactly right. I love the way you're saying this stuff because it's so first person for you. So we sometimes talk about this in theory on the Lightwell podcast when someone's an insurance professional and they're saying it's kind of like this. But one of the things we've said, and I wonder what your experience with this is what you're calling copay, some might call deductible, right?
Deductible, yeah.
So when someone increases their deductible, it's one of the very few levers that you as a consumer of insurance have to pull to say, if I'm willing to take on more of this, I'll actually pay less over here.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I don't know if I'm answering the question for you, but is that part of what you're educating your district, decision makers on?
Absolutely. So I will give you an example of something recently where, so we had when Helene came through back in September of 24. So we have a church district camp, and obviously there were a lot of trees on the property. So a lot of damage to some of the infrastructure there as well. So I needed to understand what coverage did we have for that? But one of the things that we talked through with our representative is when we looked at what that deductible was and the risk that if we report that loss, how's that going to affect our insurance policy next year and the following year? We actually made a very different decision than we would have made otherwise, because we wanted to make sure that we were not losing sight of long term for just short term payout. And that really influenced, but that was through a series of just having very open conversations with our representative, where I knew they had our best interests at heart, and how they were advising me was helping me to think through it through a bit of a different lens, which then I took that knowledge and had conversations with some of our other campuses who maybe had maybe their infrastructure, the number of buildings was greater, to help them think through how would they handle if something like that happened. And yeah, so that was, it was, like I said, it was a different decision than we would have made if I didn't have that conversation. But I feel like it was the best decision for the long-term life of that policy.
That's So again, I hate to say it again. I absolutely love the way you're capturing these ideas from the perspective of someone who's actually consuming insurance. So one thing we've talked about on this podcast at length is the idea of insurability. That it's not just about do you have insurance for this or that, but are you making yourself more or less of a risk to the company who's offering you a policy next year, the year after that, 5 years from now. You have the ability by retaining some of your own risk, or like you said, let's not report that claim. Can we raise some funds and actually just take care of that ourselves? Because then our policy doesn't go up next year or the year after that, or we're not looking at getting non-renewed because the market is so competitive.
Right,
And like
exactly.
you said about who could have seen a weather event like Milton taking over South Carolina? These things have been happening in our industry so much. So I don't really have a question. I just am affirming you on that, unless you'd want to add anything to that about this idea of insurability for ministries.
The only thing I would add to that, this was a recent situation that came up, and I would encourage anyone to walk through their campus and see, are there any areas that could be a risk you might not thought about? So this was at our local level where we had in front of one of our facilities a sidewalk, and the sidewalk was not in good repair, and it was made out of some pavers. And we looked through that. Our trustees looked at it, and the conversation we had was, you know, that's not in really good shape. What if someone falls? Well, of course, I'm thinking about this could be a claim on our insurance. And so we chose, I mean, it was $1,500 to repair that and pour a new sidewalk. That to me is a no-brainer, right? Let's do that. So we did that, but those are the areas where when I'm looking at that with our churches and with the district is what are those areas you could make small changes today that could really reduce your risk? Because if we had a church member or one of the children fall on that sidewalk, that would have been a claim reported, probably a medical claim reported. And so I would just encourage people look through that because there may be things that you can do that, like you said, will actually help the insurability of your property, long term.
That's outstanding. It's so ironic in a way, and it's not, it's not funny, but it's sort of like the sad type of funny. Maybe ironic is the right word. Is that much of Lightwell's risk management material has to do with those basic things, slip and falls, and property issues that are preventable. And it can kind of feel like, well, shouldn't everybody know about that? But if everybody did know about that and everybody did do something, it would keep people safe and it would keep premiums lower, probably. Like
Yeah.
it would really make a big difference. So I love that that's the example you chose. If I asked, are there other areas that you see as you walk properties with your district to say, here's a preventative maintenance move you could make, or an idea that you often find yourself sharing with them?
Yeah. So, just another example, I was visiting one of our properties, another property in the district, and I noticed the stairs to get up to their church was crumbling. And spoke to the pastor. And quite honestly, it was going to be quite expensive to repair that. So that's a conversation we have then at the district level is how can we come alongside of some of our churches here to help them with some of those repairs? One, it makes it look much better, right? Just curb appeal is much better. And people come into your facility, you want that to be desirable, but then also helping them avert some of that risk. The one thing also that I've noticed when I've walked across the properties with our churches is if they are repairing anything, like, I don't know, let's say they're maybe pouring concrete pad for a basketball court, or maybe they're doing septic repairs or something like that, is making sure that you outline that with caution tape, making sure that you put maybe some barriers up. I know we just had that at one of our churches where I was walking through and I said, we're going to have children playing in that field by that weekend. And we need some caution tape. We need some barriers set up because if someone happens to go over there, that could, that would have been a liability for us. So I would also say, I mean, there's so often churches have things they're doing, repairs, things going on, or maybe infrastructure changes that just kind of look through with that eye a little bit and just thinking a little, maybe one step ahead.
Love it. It's the stuff that it's a little bit like exercising, where it's like you don't know that you maybe have missed out on that until you're like, "Oh, no, this I wish I was in a different shape or whatever," but it's like you gotta do the preventative maintenance work. You have to do it before it's a problem to really avoid, the problems that can come. And so with this same idea in mind, it could be kind of redundant, but if you could go back as an insurance decision maker, as someone who has now become a savvy consumer of insurance, is there a question or a core few questions that you would coach up a decision maker to ask to make sure that their insurance agent or their insurance company is providing for their needs?
So one, a detailed review of your policy is obviously very important. And it doesn't hurt even to ask that representative if you can maybe do some sort of a video meeting at your property to walk through that with them, or if they can come on site is even better. The other thing I would say too that we've noticed a lot of our, and this is true across churches, a lot of churches are old, right? They've aged. They might have been there for 100 years already. And so code then is not what code is now. And so there are certain things you can grandfather in as you're making changes. But what I would encourage people to do is not to do only the minimum of that, to think about even if it would meet code just to, be grandfathered in some ways, is that really what needs to be done? For example, is that going to provide you with the firewall barrier that you actually need if you do that? Or the sprinkler system that you might need, or some of those things that I would look at as it's not just meeting code, but since the infrastructure is probably older and there were some things grandfathered in, look at that through a little bit different lens because you may want to go one step up on that from what you normally would to make sure that you are just preventing some of that risk. I mean, it's hard to prevent everything, but you want to make sure that you're able to do everything you possibly can.
Absolutely. That's absolutely right. Okay, so the reason that you buy insurance is so that if the worst case scenario does take place, you have protection there. You have something there that's a safety net for your financial needs, maybe even your reputational needs. Have you had to walk through the process of submitting a claim, making sure that it was priced appropriately, that you got the payment that you needed, and how would you describe that process for someone maybe who's just getting started and hasn't had to walk through that yet? What's walking through a claim look like?
Yeah, so the first ones I walked through, probably I did not do as good of a job as what I try to do now because I've learned. So, the one thing that I've learned is always take pictures immediately because as things change or people move things around, you need to take pictures immediately. So that way your insurance representative can actually see what happened, where it was. That's very important. What I would say too is making sure that you have good documentation of what happened. Also, making sure that any contractors who are going to come in, repair, that you may need multiple quotes from them, but you want to make sure that they're reputable as well, and that's going to be really important. I know the claims that I've walked through with Lightwell honestly have been it's been really good. So, where we probably have had more challenges is where we did not think through ahead of time deductibles or what coverage we had actually purchased. So, we've tried to get much smarter with that. And really, if you can do that, the other thing is you're gonna have to provide documentation on what caused, the, whatever it might have been that happened. For example, I got a call from one of our pastors at our church, and their ceiling had caved in, just caved in. And, they were trying to get their insurance company to cover that. So, the insurance company refused to cover it. I got involved with it, but what we actually realized was there was no one event that caused it to fall. The building had become very weak. It did not have good repairs done to it. The infrastructure, the trusses were not what they should have been. And so really it wasn't anything the insurance would have to cover. And so, obviously that was a big expense to that church. But what it did is it made me more aware of even the trustees of our churches to go through, check that infrastructure, go up in the attic, see what those things look like because when something falls apart like that, that's not always an insurance claim that you can file. And because it may not be covered because it could just be poor infrastructure in itself. So yeah, but I mean, following that through, I know they've been very timely with payments and things like that. What I would say is I always make sure and when I'm talking with our churches is make sure you have a rainy day fund put aside because sometimes you do need cash immediately to make a repair that the insurance company will reimburse you for, but that might take a couple of weeks to get all that done. But we've got church on Sunday. We've got to have this done, this repaired. So that has also helped is just careful planning. And if you have that rainy day fund that, if something happens, we can immediately get it repaired while we're working with our insurance company but contact them immediately too, because let them come alongside of you and help you through that process.
Wow. So much good information there. If you are a ministry leader listening to this, tune in, click back the 15-second button several times and take notes. That was great stuff. And on the front of what we hope it's like, I love the way you describe that it's like things have gone pretty well through those claims processes. It's not a good day to have to file a claim. But what we like to say sometimes, it's the best possible worst case scenario when you're working with someone who understands your needs and knows how to meet them and is in it with you to make sure that that claim gets paid in a timely way. Would you want to go through it at all? Absolutely not. But at least you've got a partner who really is tracking with you and understanding. Another thing we like to say, or aspirationally we hope is true with Lightwell Insurance Advisors, is they're taking care of something for ministries that frees them up in their head and in their heart to focus on the things they're actually called to. Has that been your experience or the experience of the insurance decision makers you work with within the districts there in the Wesleyan Church?
Yes, and I would say one good example, I'm just thinking when you're talking right now is when I go through the insurance policy, let's say with a fine tooth comb with the representative, usually they're getting back to me before I can even get back to them. And then they're usually pinging me as a follow-up, Denise, have you looked this? Have you talked through this? These are things that we talked about. So they are making sure that they're keeping a log of that because I'm probably doing something else, right? 10 million other things, but they're making sure. The other thing I would say too is I have learned to take advantage of extra resource or additional resource ancillary things that Lightwell has. So one thing that I did not realize that our representative told me this a couple years ago is he said, it could be I don't know, it could be a question on a legal document. Now, obviously, they're not our legal counsel, but I will first go to them and say, "Do you have a template for this? What does this look like?" Sometimes I'm reviewing lease agreements that maybe our churches are, establishing with maybe someone who wants to use their facility or something. So I have learned always check first with Lightwell and say, do you have anything of a template? What guidance? I went to them right now. We're obviously security at churches is top of mind right now. And so I'm working through that with the district and what does that look like? And so the first person I contacted again was Lightwell. And I said, do you have a template? What do you have in this area? There may be something, there may not be something, but I've just found that it's so helpful. Sometimes they have just good resource and things we can tap into there. So that's in addition to the insurance, but it's a really nice add.
Oh, I love that. Well, I mean, those kind of things, risk management, you never know necessarily the claim that didn't happen because you practiced good risk management. So those resources, the willingness for someone to look at your documents or provide you a template, those can mean more than what you could probably put a figure on because you again don't know what it's keeping you from or keeping you safe from. It's fantastic. I really appreciate that, Denise. So I want to honor your time. And I don't want to also be redundant with anything, but is there anything that you were thinking I would ask that I haven't yet? Anything you want to talk about that would be helpful for the ministry leaders listening today?
I guess what I would say, so I've learned a lot by trial and error, obviously, and I'm still learning from trial and error. But what I would say is develop a relationship with your representative, and that is very important. I know when people focus on only the cost and they're getting new quotes, and I know sometimes you have a new facility, you want to make sure you're being wise with your funds, but develop a relationship with your representative because you're probably gonna need to leverage that at some point, but just that partnership, I know would probably be one thing that I would say. I know years ago, I did not take advantage of that like I should have, but now since I have, why it obviously is, much, much better, and even now when we're putting up new facilities across the district, could be a new building, a new gym, something else we're putting up, why I'm contacting them immediately to say, when do I need to start insurance on this, building, right? Because it could be is it when the slab is poured? Is it when the walls start going up? How is that? What if something happens at the site? So those things are just things that I would say contact them sooner rather than later.
This is all really good stuff. Denise Bailey, Director of Operations for the South Carolina District of the Wesleyan Church. They are lucky to have you. You are clearly so thoughtful and good at this. And I know that your Lightwell Insurance Advisor there in South Carolina, I know them personally, and they are really proud to work with you as you both serve those churches together. So I want to say personally, thank you for what you're doing for the churches in South Carolina. And thank you also for being with me today on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I am so privileged to serve. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Have a great day.
You too.
My thanks once again to Denise Bailey, Director of Operations for the South Carolina District of the Wesleyan Church. She was brilliant. She had so many good insights on what questions to ask, how to better think about handling a claim, what to do first, what to do next. Those are really practical insights. Again, from the perspective of not the theoretical seller of insurance or manager of insurance, but from the consumer's standpoint, from your standpoint. If you're a ministry leader listening today, I hope you got something that's valuable for you and how you serve your church really well. One of the things she said several different times is develop a good relationship with the agent or advisor in your area. So if you want to get started with that, go to lightwell.com and look at your state. I know that there's someone in your area who would be glad to work with you to start this conversation about what your ministry needs. Until then, or the next episode of the podcast, let's go and let it shine.